They said a king without a wolf was no king at all, that a beast cursed silent was a hollow throne, that blood without a roar was just blood pretending. They had said it for 4 years now, in the markets and the prayer houses and the council chambers of the southern packs, and none of them had been wrong exactly, and none of them had been right. The woman who knew the truth was kneeling on the kitchen floor of the pack she had been cast out of, mixing crushed comfrey into goat's milk so that her son's silver eyes would look brown for one more day. She had done it for 3 years. 3 years of the same small ritual at dawn. Mortar, pestle, 3 sprigs of yarrow, a thumb of fat from yesterday's roast, the milk just warm enough to dissolve everything into a paste the colour of old honey. She painted it on his lashes with a clean finger. She painted it under his lids where the silver was brightest. He held still for her the way only a 3-year-old who had been doing a thing every day of his life would hold still, without question, without complaint, with the boredom of a small priest performing a small daily rite. "Up," she said. He blinked. The paste settled. His eyes went the colour of a weak tea. Ordinary, forgettable, safe. She kissed the crown of his head, wood smoke and warm bread and child, the smell that had held her upright through everything. "Today, you stay in the pantry." "I always stay in the pantry." "Today you stay quiet in the pantry." "I am always quiet." "Today, especially." He did not ask why. He did not ask why because Mira's son had learned not to. Mira was the kitchen maid with the broken accent and the shy hands, hired 3 years ago when the household was short for the harvest, kept on because she worked twice as fast for half the bread. Mira had a child, yes, and the child was strange but quiet, and as long as he stayed in the pantry no one minded much. Lira tied her apron. She braided her hair the way Mira braided her hair, tight and ugly and tucked under a kerchief. She wiped the paste from her fingers onto her skirt. She stood up. The Alpha King's carriage would arrive within the hour. She walked toward the kitchen door. The inspection began at the 11th bell, and that bell was the last quiet thing about the day. Pack Silvermoon had been preparing for a week. Every floor was scrubbed and every wolf was washed and every sour-faced council elder was wearing his ceremonial sash. And Luna Viola, Lira's stepmother, Healer's daughter who had married the beta of Silvermoon and buried him at the Iron Pass, then married the alpha of Silvermoon and buried him at the same border the year after, and had ruled the second largest pack in the kingdom as Luna regent in her own right for the 4 years since, stood at the doors of the great hall in a gown the colour of arterial blood. Her hair was up, her smile was tight. She had practised it. In the kitchen, Lira lined up 48 glazed game hens on copper trays and counted them twice. She counted them 3 times. Counting was a thing she did when her hands wanted to shake. "You're slow today, Mira," said Esme. Esme was the head cook. Esme was 71, and her left hip cracked when she walked, and she had hired Lira 3 years ago, and she had never asked one question about it. She had not asked about the silver. She had not asked about the herb paste. She had not asked why a girl who could read a recipe in the high cant of the council scrolls was scrubbing fat off copper for room and board. Esme asked nothing. Esme noticed everything. "I'm tired," Lira said. "You are afraid." "Both." Esme passed her a wooden spoon. "He is in the pantry. I checked." "Thank you." "He has the wooden horse." "Thank you." "Mira." Lira looked up. "Whatever happens out there today," Esme said, "stay back here. Stay back here even if you hear the king himself." "I will." She would not. The bell rang, then the second bell, then the trumpets, and the doors, and the rolling murmur of 200 wolves and their courtmates filing into the great hall. Lira heard Viola's voice cut through the rest of it, the high, practised sweetness she used in public. "Welcome, sire. Welcome, your grace. Welcome." And she heard a second voice answer, low and short and not interested in being welcomed. Alpha King Dominic of the Northern Crown was 3 syllables long, and he did not waste any of them. Lira closed her eyes for a half-breath, opened them, picked up 2 copper trays, and began the slow walk to the serving table at the back of the hall. She had built a route over 3 years that kept her inside the kitchen corridor and behind the screens. Servants delivered. Servants did not enter the hall floor. Servants placed the trays on the long pass-through and retreated. She placed her trays. She turned her back. She did not look at the high table. She did not look at the king. She heard him before she saw him. Not his voice, his silence. The hall had been a soft buzz of court etiquette, and now there was a pocket of quiet around the centre of the room, the kind of quiet that meant a powerful man had stopped moving and people had stopped pretending not to notice. She heard glasses set down. She heard a chair scrape. She heard Viola laugh too loud, twice, the second one trying to bury the first. She turned. She told herself she would not turn. She turned anyway. Rowan was standing in the middle of the hall. He had walked through the screens. He had walked past the understewards. He had walked through 200 guests, and none of them had stopped him because none of them had seen him. 3 years old in a brown smock, holding a wooden horse by one ear, drifting through the room like a small ghost the wards forgot to count. He stopped 6 feet in front of the high table. He looked up at the man in black sitting in the second-best chair, because the king refused thrones in other packs' halls. He tilted his head. The wooden horse hung from his fist. The herb paste was very good today. His eyes were the colour of weak tea. He said, "You smell like me." The hall did not move. It was not silence the way silence usually worked. It was the silence that happens when 200 wolves all stop breathing on the same beat, and the air thickens, and a chandelier crystal ticks once against another crystal somewhere above, and the sound is louder than a horn. The king did not answer. He was looking at the boy. Lyra's tray slid out of her hands. She caught it against her hip without thinking, and the catch saved the copper from clattering on the flagstones but did not save the small private order of her body, which had been holding itself together by a series of habits as fine as thread for 3 years, and was now coming apart all at once. Her hearing dropped. The hall went underwater for her. Her ears filled with the wet rushing of her own pulse, and inside that rushing she could hear, very far away, her son's small voice repeating in her head, the way a phrase repeats in a dream you have just woken from. "You smell like me. You smell like me. You smell like me." And she understood, slowly, in the way a body understands a thing before the mind agrees to follow, that the morning had ended, and the herb paste had ended, and the kitchen had ended, and 3 years of carefully built quiet had ended in the space of 5 words spoken by a child who did not yet know what a wolf was. The herbs on her fingers had begun to sweat in the heat of the kitchen. A smear of the paste had transferred to the rim of the copper, and her knuckle was wet and brown, and she could smell, very faintly, the comfrey and fat smell that meant her son's eyes were about to go silver in front of the most powerful wolf in the kingdom. Viola saw her. 6 feet to the king's right, Luna Viola in her blood-red gown saw the kitchen maid frozen in the doorway with herb paste on her hand, and the herb paste was the kind a Silvermoon-born healer would recognize, because Silvermoon-born healers had used it for a single specific purpose for 9 generations, to hide a silver-eyed child. Viola's face did something small and white and very quick. Then she rose. "Forgive me, sire," she said, smooth, brisk, already striding for Rowan with both her hands open. "The kitchen child has wandered. The maid is new. She has been instructed. I will have her removed." She reached for Rowan's shoulder. The boy did not look at her. The king said, "Do not touch him." Viola's hand froze in the air. 3 words. Quiet. Not loud. Not a shout. A statement of fact the way men state the weather. Viola's hand stayed where it had stopped, an inch from Rowan's shoulder, and the entire high table watched it stay there, because Alpha King Dominic of the Northern Crown had spoken, and the hall remembered suddenly what that meant. "Sire," Viola said. Her voice was a thread. "He is a servant's child. He is—" "Step back." She stepped back. The king did not stand. He set his palms on the carved arms of the chair and he leaned forward, and he looked at Rowan the way a man looks at a star chart he has not seen in a very long time. Then he looked past Rowan. He looked at the doorway of the kitchen corridor, where a thin woman in a kerchief was standing with herb paste on her thumb and her face the colour of paper, and her body so still that nothing on her moved, not her eyes, not her chest, not even her braid. He looked at her for the longest beat of her life. Viola found her voice. "Sire," she said brightly, "I must apologize for the maid. She is a runaway from one of the southern packs. We took her in for charity. She has clearly tried to use her bastard, in some attempt to extort. Quiet. The word landed flat. Viola went quiet. Rowan tilted his head again. He said, "You smell like me." And then the king stood up. He was tall the way mountains are tall. He had been described in pamphlets and council briefings and her own girlhood imagination as broad-shouldered and dark-haired and grey-eyed, and all three were true, and none of those words covered what he was. His coat was black, his hands were bare. He had a scar that ran from his right temple into his hairline, and Lira had heard him called the Cursed Crown for 4 years now, and she had never, until this moment, understood what the curse looked like from the inside. He walked around the high table. 200 wolves shifted in their chairs. He walked past the council elders. He walked past Viola, who had stopped breathing and was trying to pretend she had not. He walked toward Rowan and the kitchen corridor, and Lira, and the floor of the great hall was 3 years she had hidden compressed into 8 steps of his boots on stone. He stopped in front of Rowan. He went down on one knee. The Kingdom of the North had not seen Dominic of the Northern Crown go to a knee in 4 years. There were songs about it. There were 3 songs about it. 200 wolves saw it now, and the room rearranged its understanding of the world in real time, the way a room does when something impossible is happening, and no one has yet decided which other impossible thing to abandon to make room for it. The king looked at the child. "Say it again," he said. Rowan blinked. The paste was holding. Barely. "You smell like me," he said. His 3-year-old voice was small and clear. He thought a moment. "And you are sad." The king's mouth did something. It was not a smile. It was the muscle that controlled smiling remembering itself. "Yes," he said. "Both of those things." Rowan reached up and put his small palm flat on the king's bare wrist. A sound went through the hall that no one in the hall would ever describe out loud. A long, low note like a bell struck in a deep room, a vibration that ran through the soles of every boot and the bones of every spine. It was not magic exactly. It was a wolf waking up. A wolf that had been sleeping for 4 years rolled over inside the chest of the man in black, and lifted its head and opened its yellow eyes and remembered its own name. The king's spine stiffened, his pupils dilated. He breathed in once, slow, deep, the way a drowning man breathes when he has just broken surface and is not yet sure he is allowed to. Lira saw it happen. She did not understand it. She did not need to. She watched the most powerful man in the kingdom kneel on stone in front of her 3-year-old son, with his palm under her 3-year-old son's palm, and she watched something inside that man come back from the dead, and she knew in her body before her brain caught up. She knew the way an animal knows. She had been wrong for 3 years about whose son she was hiding, or, more precisely, she had been wrong for 3 years about whether the man Viola sold her to at the Harvest Moon had been a stranger. He stood up. He picked up Rowan in one arm. He did not ask. He did not hesitate. He set the boy on his hip the way a man who had not held a child in 20 years remembered suddenly that this was a thing arms did. Rowan held the wooden horse against the king's collarbone and looked at his own paste-dimmed reflection in a polished button and said, "Your coat is scratchy." "It is," said the king. He turned. He looked at Lira. He said, "Come." She did not move. It was not refusal. It was not pride. It was the body of a woman who had spent 3 years training herself never to walk toward a high table, refusing to remember how to walk forward. "Mira," Viola said, very fast, very gentle, very afraid. "Mira, come here. Take the child. The king is being generous. Come here, dear, quickly." The king did not look at Viola. He said again to Lira, "Come." Her feet moved. The hall watched her cross. They watched the herb paste on her hand. They watched the kerchief and the apron and the cracked leather shoes. The kitchen maid was walking toward the king of the north, and Luna Viola was a woman with arsenic in her stomach, and somewhere in the gallery a council elder was beginning to count backwards in his head to a harvest moon 4 years ago, and to do arithmetic he did not want to do. Lyra reached the king. He looked at her. His grey eyes had a thin ring of yellow around the pupil that had not been there an hour ago. He did not smile. He did not soften. He looked at her hand, the one with the paste on the thumb, and his nostrils flared once, and the wolf inside his chest said one word that she did not hear because she was not yet a wolf. but his mouth moved with the shape of it. He said, very low, "What did you call him?" She did not answer. "What," he said, "did you call my son?" The hall heard. The hall heard. Viola's hand found the edge of the high table behind her and held on. Lyra's throat closed. She made it open. She made her voice come out the way she had made her voice come out for 3 years in this kitchen. Flat, polite, servile, small. Mira's voice, not hers. "His name," she said, "is Rowan." The king closed his eyes. It was a small thing. It was the smallest possible thing. His eyes shut and stayed shut for 1 full second, and a man who had not let himself feel a feeling in front of witnesses in 4 years let one cross his face. Not grief, not joy, not relief. Something older than any of them. A man hearing the name of a child he had not known he had. He opened his eyes. He looked at Viola. Viola took a step backwards. He said, "We will speak in the council room. Now." He set Rowan on his hip more firmly. He held out his other hand to Lira. She looked at it. A king's bare hand, an inch from her wrist, and she had been wrong for 3 years about what she was hiding and from whom. She took it. His thumb brushed her knuckle. The herb paste smeared. Heat went up her arm. Not warmth, heat. The heat of a long iron pressed flat against skin, travelling from her wrist to her shoulder to her chest, and she gasped, once, and clamped it down before the second gasp got out. The mark that bloomed under the silk of her sleeve did not show through the kitchen wool. It would show later. It would show later when she was alone and her hand was shaking. The king did not let go. He walked her out of the hall with her son on his hip and her hand in his hand, and 200 wolves bowed because none of them knew what else to do, and Viola did not bow. Viola followed. Behind them, on the floor, the wooden horse lay where it had fallen. The council room was small and very old. Stone walls, a long table, 1 window. The window faced east, and the morning had become afternoon while she was not paying attention, and the light coming through it was gold and dust. The king set Rowan on the table. He sat in the chair next to the table. He held Rowan upright with one hand on the boy's back the way a man steadies a fawn. He looked at Lira. He said, "Sit." She sat. He said, "Speak." She did not. Viola tried. Viola had followed them into the council room and had taken a position by the door and was trying to recover the brightness she had practiced for the inspection, and she said, very fast, "Sire, this woman is a runaway. She is a known liar. She came to us 3 years ago under a false name, and we took her in out of—" The king raised one finger. Viola stopped. He said, without looking at her, "I will speak with the Luna in the 2nd hour. Steward." A man in a grey coat stepped out of a corner Lira had not noticed him in. He was tall, thin, 60, with the careful eyes of a man whose job for 30 years had been to know things before his king did. He bowed. "Sire." "Remove the Luna to the east chamber. Post 2 of my guard. She does not leave. She speaks to no one." "Sire," said the steward. "Sire," said Viola, her voice cracking. "Sire, I am the Luna of this pack." "You were." 2 words, quiet, flat, the way men state the weather. The steward took Viola by the elbow with great courtesy. She did not fight. She looked at Lira on her way out, and the look had 4 years of practiced sweetness peeled back from it, and underneath was the face Lira had seen once before, 3 years ago, in a small chapel, holding a forged healer's document. The door closed. The king looked at his son. Rowan, on the table, was attempting to braid 2 of the king's fingers together with the strap of the wooden horse he no longer had. He had decided, apparently, that the king's left hand would do as a substitute. "Are you hungry?" said the king. "Yes." "What do you like?" "Bread." "Bread." "With butter." "With butter." "And honey." "And honey." 2 honeys. 2 honeys. The king did not smile, but the muscle that controlled smiling moved again, twice, and Lira watched him watch his son, and her chest did the thing it had not done since the day she had been put out of this pack at 17, with a forged document pinned to her shoulder. It cracked, quietly, inside, no sound, just a long, thin fault line opening in a place she had cemented, over 3 years ago. "Bread is coming," he said to Rowan. He turned his head. "Tell me your name." She said her name, not Mira's. "Lira," she said. "Lira of Silvermoon, daughter of Hadrian, who was beater of this pack until 4 years ago." He did not look surprised. He said, "I know who your father was." "You knew him." "He stood at my left hand at the Battle of the Iron Pass. He saved my brother's life. He died the spring after." She had not known. Her father had been a quiet man, and he had never told her any of that. He had died with his hand on her cheek, saying, "I am sorry, child," and she had not understood at the time which thing he was sorry for. She had understood later. Sorry that he had married Viola. Sorry that he had not seen her clearly. Sorry that he was leaving Lira alone in a house with a woman who was already planning what to do with her. The king said, "You are 17. "I'm 20. "You are 17 at the harvest moon 4 years ago. You are 19 at the harvest moon 2 years ago. You are 20 now. Tell me about 4 years ago." She did not want to. She said, "I was brought to the harvest moon ball by my stepmother. I was wearing a dress my father had bought. I drank 1 cup of wine. I do not remember the rest of that night. I woke up in a barn outside the pack. I walked back to the kitchen door at dawn. 2 weeks later, my stepmother announced to the council that she had a healer's document declaring me barren by birth. She had a healer's document declaring me barren by birth because she had paid a healer to write one. The council did not require examination of a barren-born girl. They voted to strip my name. They put me out of the pack with my father's cloak and a wheel of cheese. I walked 4 days. I sold the cloak. 3 weeks after that, I knew I was pregnant. I came back to Silvermoon under another name. I worked in the kitchen. I painted his eyes brown every morning. I've done that for 3 years. She stopped. The king's hand had gone still on Rowan's back. He said, "You do not know who his father is." "No." "You know now?" "Yes." "How long have you known?" 45 minutes. He breathed out. A man breathing out 4 years. He said, "I do not remember the harvest moon 4 years ago either." She looked at him. For 3 years she had told herself that the man in the barn was no one. That had been the only way to carry the morning she had woken in the straw with a strange weight in her stomach and no memory of how the weight had come there. The man had been no one. The night had been nothing. The thing in her belly 3 weeks later had been hers alone, and only hers, and there was no one to look for and no one to fear, and no one whose face she might one day see in a market and have to recognize. No one was a survivable answer. No one was the answer that had let her stay alive. She had been wrong about no one for 46 minutes. "I went," he said, "in disguise, as a captain. 3 of my generals were meeting envoys from the southern packs, and I wanted to hear the room without being the king in the room. I drank 1 cup of wine. I do not remember the rest of that night. I woke at dawn in a barn outside a pack I did not recognize. I rode back to the Northern Crown. 3 weeks later the curse took my wolf. I have not heard him since. I have not heard him until your son put his hand on my wrist." He was looking at her. She did not answer at first. She made her face do nothing. The face was a skill she had built over 3 years, and she did not abandon it now, because there were 48 things moving inside her chest at once, and only one of them needed to be in her face, and that one was the calm one. The barn had a name. The barn had a face. The face had a scar at the temple, and the scar was the one across the council table from her, and her son had taken the king's wrist in the great hall, because her son had known, in the wordless animal way of small children, what her body had not let her know in 3 years of carrying him on her hip. He said, very low, "Someone arranged us both." She heard herself say, "Yes." He said, "Your stepmother." She said, "Yes." He looked at his son. He said, "She has 12 days. She did not understand at first. She thought he meant before he killed her. Then she saw his eyes go to Rowan's face, and she saw him counting something he should not have been able to count, and she said, "Why 12 days?" He said, "Because his wolf is rising 9 years early. Because the only blood that anchors a wolf rising that early is royal blood. Because the only royal blood within reach is yours and mine, and because the ritual will not take if your wolf is bound." He paused. "Your wolf is bound." She said, "I know. He said, "I will fix that." He said it the way another man might have said, "I will fetch the bread." It was not a vow. It was not a promise. It was the assertion of a fact about the future by a man who had spent 20 years building a kingdom on the assertion of facts about the future, and Lira, who had stopped believing in futures 3 years ago, sat in a council room with son on the table and watched her 3-year-old son braid the king's fingers and felt the old fault line open one more notch. A knock. The steward, returning, with bread. Branwen, the royal healer, arrived from the Northern Crown by hard ride that evening. She was small and grey and had the eyes of a woman who had been disappointed by enough things to be unsurprised by any new thing. She examined Rowan. She examined Lira. She told Lira to take off her sleeve and looked at the mark that had bloomed under the silk where the king's thumb had brushed her knuckle, and she sat down in a chair without being invited and put her face in her hands for one full breath. "Selene-born," she said. The king said, "Speak plainly." "She is Selene-born," said Branwen. "The old line, the first crown. Before your dynasty there was theirs, and theirs was bound and burned and scattered 9 generations ago, and we were told there were none left. We have been told that since I was a child, and I am not young. This girl is the last of it. Her wolf is silver. Her wolf is bound. The beta-line healers of Silvermoon have been suppressing Selene blood in this valley for 9 generations because they were paid to. Her stepmother is the last of those healers. Her stepmother bound her at 13 with a draught she said was a tonic for fever. Her stepmother rebound her at 17 with a forged barren document signed by her own hand. The beta-line bind does not only stop the wolf, it dims the scent. A bound, Selene-born woman smells of the kitchen she stands in, and the wool she wears and the wood smoke around her, and nothing more, and that is how no wolf in Silvermoon has scented her in 3 years for the daughter of the man they buried. Her stepmother counted on the bind when she let her come back. Her stepmother had been counting on the bind since she had first given the cup. The boy's father is the king. The boy's mother is the lost crown. The boy is the first child born of both royal lines in 9 generations, and that is why his wolf is rising at 3, and that is why his wolf will not survive the rising without a blood anchor, and that is why the blood anchor will not take if the mother is bound. She lowered her hands. "You have 12 days, she said. Lira said, "Unbind me." Branwen said, "I cannot unbind a Selene wolf. The bind is wound into the blood. The bind unwinds with proximity. The bind unwinds with proximity to a mated wolf in roar. The king's wolf has roared for the first time in 4 years today, and that is why this is possible at all. You must stay close to him. You must touch him. You must allow him to touch you. You must do this for 12 days. The wolf will unwind. On the 12th day, at the high moon, we perform the anchor. If the wolf is not unwound, the anchor will not take. If the anchor does not take, the boy does not live to 4. The mark under Lira's sleeve had begun to itch. She did not move for a long moment. There was, she discovered, no place inside her body to put any of what Branwen had said. Selene-born was a word she had heard in childhood, the way one heard the names of old gods, present in stories, absent from the world. Her mother was a name she had never had. Hadrian had said only that her mother had been a healer from the northern hills, and that she had died, and the saying had been short, and the saying had been final, and she had not been told to ask again. She had not asked again. She had loved her father, and she had not asked again, and her father had died with his hand on her cheek saying he was sorry. And now, sitting in a council room with son on the table, she understood what at least one of the things he had been sorry for had been. Her mother had been Viola's sister. Her mother had died in childbirth. The woman who had raised her over the body of the sister she had let die, or arranged to die, or watched die from a corner of a room with her hands folded. Lira did not yet know which. She found that her left hand had begun to grip her own right wrist, where her father had used to grip it when she was small and could not sleep, and she had to make a small effort to relax the grip, because the wrist had begun to hurt. She tried to remember. She remembered being 13 with a fever, and Viola sitting on the edge of her bed with a cup of something the colour of weak tea. Viola's hand had been cool on her forehead. Viola's voice had been gentle. She had drunk the cup. The fever had broken the next day. She had been told she had been very brave, and she had been a child who liked to be told she was brave, and so she had drunk every cup placed in her hand that year, and the year after, and the year after, and she had not known, drinking any of them, that the fever cup at 13 had been the first one. There had been a fever tonic at 13, and a forged barren document at 17, and a drugged cup at the harvest moon 3 weeks after that. 3 small acts of preparation across the length of her life, all of them by the same hand, all of them received by her in the belief that they had been kindnesses, or at worst routines, and the woman who had prepared them was at this moment under guard in a tower 1 floor below, and Lira could not tell at this distance whether the body in her chest was holding rage or pity or grief, or whether the 3 were the same thing held at different angles. She looked at Rowan. He had fallen asleep on the council table with his cheek on the king's wrist, and a crust of buttered bread in one hand, and the king's other hand on his back, still steadying, the way you steady a fawn. His paste had begun to wear off in the warmth of the sun through the window. A thread of silver had come through the brown at the corner of one closed eye. No one in the room remarked on it. They had stopped having to. She breathed in. She breathed out. She set her wrist down on the council table where it stopped hurting. She said, "All right." She said it because she had nothing else to say that would mean more than that. She said it because in her body, under the rage and the pity and the grief and the names she had just been given for the first time, and the mother she would not now ever know, and the 13-year-old girl drinking a cup on a quiet evening, the largest thing was a 3-year-old boy with a thread of silver showing at the corner of his eye and 12 days to live. The rest of it could be answered for later. All of it could be answered for later. The boy could not be answered for later. The boy was now. "All right," she said again, more quietly, fixing the word into place against the inside of her chest, the way one fixes a small nail into a wall when one has decided where the picture is going to hang. The clock had already started. The first night she did not sleep. They moved her and Rowan to the east wing, into a suite Viola had been using as a winter parlour. The king's guard stood outside the door. 4 men, 2 on the inside, 2 on the outside, and the room had a fire that someone had built, and a bed that someone had turned down, and a small cot at the foot of the bed for Rowan, and a basin of warm water, and a robe that did not belong to a kitchen maid, and clean clothes that did not fit, exactly, but fit well enough. On the small parlour table, set there by some quiet hand she would never identify, was the wooden horse with the chipped ear that Rowan had dropped on the flagstones of the great hall, carried up the back stairs with the rest of the day's misplaced things, and put where the boy would find it in the morning. She sat on the edge of the bed with Rowan asleep against her hip, and she did not cry. She had not cried in 3 years. She had taught herself not to cry by counting hens. She counted hens now. She counted them backwards from 48. She got to 31, and her throat began to burn. She got to 22, and her chest began to hurt. Not the chest pain of grief, the chest pain of a wall she had built to keep grief out beginning to give. She got to 19, and the back of her tongue tasted like iron. She got to 14, and she felt the hot wet at the corner of her eye, and she put the back of her hand against it and pressed. She got to 9, and her voice cracked on the count. She got to 4, and the first tear got past her hand. She got to 1. She stopped counting. She lay down on the bed beside her son, and she put her face into the pillow, and she made no sound, and her shoulders shook for an hour, and she did not let one of the shudders come out of her throat because Rowan was sleeping, and she had spent 3 years not letting her crying wake him. When she was done, she lay still. She breathed. She wiped her face with the corner of the sheet. She pulled Rowan against her chest and felt his small fist close in the fabric of the strange robe. She did not sleep that night either. In the morning, the king was at the door. He did not come in. He stood outside in his coat, and he said, through the closed door, "Will you walk with me?" She walked with him. They walked the east garden for an hour. He did not speak much. He pointed at a wall. He named a tree. He said, "My mother planted that," and did not elaborate. He held her hand because Branwen had said proximity. The mark under her sleeve warmed by degrees. By the end of the hour it had spread an inch. He said, on the way back, "You will eat with me in the mornings. You will walk with me in the afternoons. You will sit with me in the evenings. "Tell me if any of this is wrong." She said, "None of it is wrong." He said, "Good." That was the first day. There were 11 left. Steward Garrick stood at the council room window after midnight on the third day and watched the king. The king was alone at the long table. He had taken his coat off, which Garrick had not seen him do in a council room in 3 years. He had a piece of paper in his right hand. The piece of paper was a list of the names of the Southern Pack generals who had been at the Harvest Moon Ball 4 years ago. He had been reading it for an hour. He had not looked away from it. 3 of the names had been circled in his own hand. 2 riders had been dispatched at noon to summon the 3 under royal seal, and a 3rd rider had gone to the Healer's Hall of the Northern Crown to ask Branwen to prepare a binding the king had not used in his reign, and would not have used now if any other route had presented itself, the old truth ritual that did not torture a man and did not need to. Garrick watched him fold the paper, place it on the table, set both hands flat on either side of it, and lower his forehead onto his own forearm. He stayed there. He did not move. After a while his shoulders moved once, the way a man's shoulders move when he is allowing one breath to do the work of an hour of weeping. Then he sat up. He folded the paper. He put it in his pocket. He said, without turning around, "How long have you been there, Garrick?" 40 minutes, sire." "You should sleep." "You should sleep, sire." The king almost smiled. The muscle moved again. He said, "Tell me about her father." Hadrian was a quiet man. He loved his daughter. He did not see his wife clearly. Sire." "Yes." "The boy?" "What about him?" "He looks like you, sire, around the mouth." The king turned around. He looked at his steward of 30 years. His face did something Garrick would not describe to anyone for the rest of his life. "Does he?" the king said. "Yes, sire." He picked up his coat. He walked out of the council room. Garrick stood at the window a moment longer with the lamp on the table behind him, then went and put out the lamp, then went to bed. The 4th day Viola moved. She moved at the council session. The council session was the standing weekly meeting of the 7 beta houses of Silvermoon, and the king had allowed it to proceed, because cancelling it would have told the houses there was a crisis, and the king did not yet want the houses to know there was a crisis. Lira sat at the back of the gallery with a veil over her hair, which was a compromise the steward had suggested, and which she had accepted. Rowan was with Esme in the East Suite. 2 of the King's Guard were with Esme and Rowan in the East Suite. She had been promised 3 times that no one would touch her son. Viola, who had been confined to the East Chamber for 4 days, was brought to the council room in chains. She was wearing the blood-red gown. Her hair was up. Her hands were bound at the wrist with silver. Her face had been washed. She walked in between 2 guards with her chin level and her eyes forward, and the 7 beta house heads in the council room did not know yet that the Luna of their pack had been confined, and they all stood up at once in confusion, and Viola spoke before any of them could ask. "My lords of the council," she said. Her voice was beautiful. It had always been beautiful. "My lords, I come before you in chains because the Alpha King of the Northern Crown has made an accusation against me that I will answer in this room and in no other. 4 years ago at the Harvest Moon, I am accused of arranging a meeting between a stranger and the beta's daughter, Lira of Silvermoon. I am accused of forging a barren document. I am accused of binding her wolf. I am accused of returning her to this pack as a servant. I am accused of attempting to murder her son this morning." A glass of water on the council table shook. "I am ready," Viola said, "to confess to the first 4. Yes, I did all of those things. I admit them now, before this council, and I throw myself on the mercy of the king. The 5th I deny absolutely. I would never have harmed a child. I am not capable of it." The first murmur from the beta house heads. Viola turned with grace to face the gallery. She looked up. She looked at Lira. She said, "The reason I confess is this. The girl Lira of Silvermoon is not the daughter of Hadrian. She is the daughter of a Selene line healer, and her birth mother was my own sister, and her birth mother died in childbirth, and I raised her as my own under my husband's roof, and my husband never knew. I did what I did because I could not allow a Selene-born child to inherit a beta house. The bloodline is poisoned. I was protecting Silvermoon. I was protecting the kingdom. I confess that I was wrong about the means. I do not confess that I was wrong about the cause. The Selene line was burned for a reason. The boy in the East Suite is the last of it. The boy will not survive what is inside him. The girl in the gallery has been bound for 7 years, and she has been bound for 7 years, because to unbind her is to release what was burned for cause. My lords, I beg of you, do not let the king do what he is about to do. She lowered her head. She said softly, "Vote." The council murmur became a roar. Lira sat in the gallery with the veil over her hair and her hands folded in her lap and her heart hammering against her ribs the way an animal hammers against the bars of a cage. 3 things had happened at once. Viola had confessed to the first 4 crimes in order to swallow the 5th. Viola had publicly recast herself as a tragic patriot. Viola had handed the 7 Beta House heads a story they would prefer to believe, because believing it would let them keep the order of the world they had been promoted inside of for 9 generations. Lyra understood in that moment that Viola was not finished. She understood it the way an animal understands the smell of a snake. She stood up. The veil slid back. The 7 Beta House heads turned. The king at the head of the table turned. Viola did not turn. Viola had known Lyra would stand. Viola had counted on it. Lyra walked down the gallery steps. She walked to the council table. She did not look at Viola. She looked at the king. She said, "Sire, I would like to address the council." He said, "You have the floor." She turned to the 7 Beta House heads. She had known 6 of them since she was a child. She had served 2 of them their evening meal in the past 3 years, and they had not recognized her. She said, "My name is Lira. My father was Hadrian, who stood at the left hand of the Alpha King at the Battle of the Iron Pass. My mother was a Selene-born woman from the northern hills, who died in childbirth, and whom I never knew. My father knew. My father raised me. My father loved me. The woman in chains in front of you is my father's second wife, and she is the sister of my mother, and she has been working for 9 generations of Beta Line healers to suppress my line, and she has done it because the Beta Line was elevated from the Selene line 9 generations ago, and they have spent 9 generations protecting that elevation." She paused. "I am not asking you to vote to protect me," she said. "I am asking you to vote on whether the 7 Beta Houses of Silvermoon believe that a 3-year-old child should die because his blood is inconvenient. That is the vote you are being offered. Dress it however you like. That is the vote." The room did not move. She turned to Viola. She said, "Confess to the 5th." Viola did not look at her. Lyra said, "Esme drank the wine you sent to my son's room this morning. Esme is 68 pounds lighter than the dose was calibrated for. Esme is in the infirmary. Esme is alive. Confess." Viola's mouth moved. Nothing came out. The king said, "Steward." Garrick stepped forward. "The kitchen mistress was poisoned at the 6th bell this morning," he said, "by a draft delivered by the Luna's own page. The page is in custody. The page has named the Luna. The wine was intended for the boy. The kitchen mistress drank it instead, because she was tasting before serving. She lives. She will recover. The draft was Beta Line Healer's compound, prepared in the Luna's stillroom, with the Luna's seal." He stepped back. Viola lowered her head. She did not speak. She did not deny. The room understood. The first Beta House head, old Aldrich, who had known Lyra's father and had voted with him for 15 years before he died, sat down very slowly. He looked at Viola. He looked at Lyra. He looked at the king. He said, in the gravelly voice of an old man who has just decided which side of a thing he's going to be on for the rest of his life, "I move that the Luna be confined to the South Tower, pending the king's judgment." 6 other betas voted aye. It was unanimous. Viola was led out. The session adjourned. Lyra sat down in the gallery with her hands folded in her lap and her heart still hammering, and the king came up the gallery steps and sat down next to her without saying anything, and put one hand on the small of her back, and she did not move, and they sat there for a long time until the council room was empty. He said quietly, 8 days. She said, 8 days. She went to the infirmary that night. The infirmary was in the south wing of the manor, and it was a long, low room with 12 cots and one window, and a smell of arnica and clean linen. 2 of the 12 cots were occupied. Esme was in the one nearest the window, because Lira had asked the underhealer to put her there. The underhealer had not asked why. The underhealer had been there for 3 years, and the underhealer knew Esme. Lira sat down on the stool beside Esme's cot. Esme's colour was not good. Her face had a greyness around the mouth that did not belong on the face of a woman who had been making bread for 50 years. Her hands lay on the blanket. The fingernails were blue. The underhealer had said the worst was past. The underhealer had said it 3 times, which was how a healer told you that the worst had been very bad. Lira took Esme's hand. The fingers were cold. She said, very quietly, "Esme." Esme's eyes opened. They were roomy and small, and they took a moment to find Lyra's face. And when they found it, they crinkled at the corner the way they had crinkled for 3 years every time Lira walked into the kitchen. "Mira," she said. "Lira?" "Lira. That is a better name. I'm glad to have it at last." "You knew?" "I knew." "How long?" 2 years. Esme's mouth moved at the corner in something that was not quite a smile. She said it slowly, the way one tells a story one has been saving for a long time and has now been given the room to tell. "Since the morning he ran a fever and I came up the stairs without warning to bring you a draught, and you put your hand over his eyes when I came through the door. A woman puts her hand over a child's eyes when there is something to see. I went back down those stairs and I did not come up unannounced again. Not in 2 years, not once. And I made a small habit of dropping a wooden spoon on the second step from the bottom every time I came up after, so that you would hear me coming and have the time you needed." Lyra's throat worked. She had wondered sometimes about the wooden spoon. She had told herself the old woman was unsteady on the stair. She had been wrong about the unsteadiness for 2 years. "Who else?" she said. "None that knew. The undercook had a notion of it, late in the first year. I told her you had been a lady's maid in the south, and that the boy's father had been a man best forgotten, and that she would oblige me by forgetting his name when the time came to be asked it. She obliged me. The steward of the wash-house asked once. I gave him a pie. He did not ask again. The Luna's page came down in the 2nd year, and walked the kitchen corridor 3 times in a single afternoon, and I poured a pot of broth at his feet by accident, and asked him would he go to the laundry and ask for a new apron, and by the time he was back I had moved the boy 2 floors. That was the worst of it. I did not tell you about it then. I would not have known how to thank you if you had. That is why I did not tell you." Lyra's eyes had begun to burn. She did not let them spill. Not here. Not yet. "I am sorry I did not tell you I knew you knew," she said. "I am sorry I did not tell you I was lying about the stairs." Esme's hand closed around Lyra's. It was a weak closing. It was a closing nonetheless. "The wine was hot," she said. Lira nodded. She did not trust her voice for a moment. "There was a back note," Esme said. "Aniseed, and something else. I will not name what the something else was. You will not need to hear it from me to know it. You will know it the next time you smell it for as long as you live. You did not let him have it. I would not have let him have it. You will remember that. Whatever else they tell you about the kitchen later, you will remember that." "I will remember." "Good. That is good." Esme closed her eyes. Esme closed her eyes. Her breathing was shallow but steady. After a moment her mouth moved again. "You were always too quick for that kitchen," she said. "I know. You should have been writing things, not chopping things. I know. You will write things now." "I will write things now." "Good." Lira sat with her for 2 hours. She did not move her hand. She did not weep. She let the small, thin fault line that had opened in her chest on the first night in the East Suite stay open, because the price for keeping it closed had been her son's safety, and her son was safe now, and the cost of keeping a fault line that long without letting one breath out through it was a cost she did not need to keep paying. She breathed out through it. She kept Esme's hand in hers. When the king came to fetch her at the 2nd bell after midnight, he did not speak. He waited at the door. He waited a long time. When she stood up at last and crossed the room, he opened the door for her and walked her back to the East Suite with his hand on the small of her back, and he did not say a word until they reached the door, and then he said, "She will live." She said, "Yes." He said, "You will live." She said, Yes. He said, "Sleep." She slept. By the 5th day the mark had spread to her elbow. By the 6th day she could feel the bind beginning to give, and the feeling was not a thing she had any word for. The closest she came was the memory of a winter when she had been small, and her father had cut a leather strap off a horse harness with a paring knife. The strap had been wound tight around the buckle for so many years that the leather had grown into the shape of the buckle and could not remember being a strap. He had cut it. The strap had not sprung open. It had relaxed slowly over the course of a morning, finding the shape it had been before the buckle had pressed on it for so long that the leather had forgotten. That was the feeling. Something inside her was finding the shape it had been before the cup at 13. She woke at dawn that day and lay still in the bed for a long while with the sheet pulled up to her chin and her body doing the small private work of being itself again. Rowan slept against her side. His breathing was even. The bind in her chest gave another small strand and she felt it go, and a heat she did not yet know how to feel ran from her sternum to her wrists and out into her fingertips, and she lay there breathing through it the way Branwen had told her to breathe. She got up after a while. She crossed to the window. The east garden was grey with frost and the sky was the colour of a pearl. She put her forehead against the cold glass and stayed there. After a moment she went to the mirror. She did not look like Mira anymore. The face was the same face, but the brown of her eyes had a different brown underneath it, an undercoat of pewter, and the line of her jaw was a line she had not seen in a mirror since she was 16. 3 years of being Mira had taught her body to wear Mira's shoulders. The shoulders had come down, the mouth had come up. She did not know exactly who she was looking at, and she stood there for some time finding out. Rowan came up behind her with his bare feet on the cold floor. He put his small hand on her hip. He looked up at her in the mirror with his weak tea eyes that had a thread of silver showing at the corner now, and he said, "You look like me too." She turned around. She picked him up. She held him for a while in the middle of the room with no one watching, and she did not weep, because the weeping had been the first night in the East Suite and the second night in the infirmary, and the body had only so much weeping in it per week. She rocked him instead, the way she had rocked him in the pantry on nights when the kitchen had been too loud, and after a while he said he was hungry. She fed him bread with butter and the small pot of honey the king had begun sending up at first light, which Rowan had decided was a thing the king did because he was Rowan's friend. The king came at the 8th bell. They walked the garden. They held hands. The mark warmed by degrees as they walked, and they did not speak much, and the not speaking was, she discovered, a thing she had been missing for some years without knowing she had been missing it. Viola moved on the 7th night. She moved through a cousin. Lord Phelan held the smallest of the Beta houses, and he had voted aye on the 4th day under pressure, and he had been Viola's lover for 2 years, and he had not slept since the council vote. He came to the East Suite at dusk with a small dagger and the wrong amount of confidence, and the 2 guards on the inside of the door took him without difficulty, and he was hauled to the South Tower to wait with his cousin. Lira stood in the parlour afterward with Rowan on her hip and the king's hand on her shoulder. She did not shake. She had stopped shaking. The wolf in her chest had begun, on the 6th day, the long, quiet work of taking over the housework her fear had been doing for her for 7 years, and the wolf in her chest was better at it than the fear had been. By the 8th day the moon was 3 nights from full. The king said, "Walk with me." They walked the east garden again. The mark had spread to her shoulder. The wolf inside her was waking the way a long-asleep limb wakes, pins, needles, sudden warmth, the strange sensation of having been a part of her body for 7 years that she could not feel and now feeling it everywhere at once. She held the king's hand. He held hers. He did not look at her. He said, "I should have looked for you." She said, "You did not know to look." He said, "I should have looked for you anyway." She said, "You are looking for me now." He stopped walking. He turned her to face him. His grey eyes had the yellow ring around the pupil, and the yellow ring was wider than it had been on the first day. His coat was open. His collar was open. He looked tired the way men look tired when they have not let themselves be tired in 4 years, and the body has finally been given permission. He said, "Lira." She said, "Yes." He said, "I do not know how to do this." She said, "I know." She lifted her free hand. She put her palm on the side of his face. His scar was warm under her fingers. The wolf in her chest moved. She said, "You do not have to do it well. You have to do it." He closed his eyes. He turned his face into her palm. He breathed out. It was the smallest sound. It was the involuntary sound of a man who had not been touched with tenderness since he was 19 years old, and Lira, who had spent 3 years not crying over the things that had been done to her, felt one tear track down her own cheek for him. He opened his eyes. He saw it. He raised his thumb and wiped it away. He said, 2 days. She said, 2 days. She shifted for the first time at moonrise on the 11th day. She did it in private. She did it at Branwen's instruction, in the small enclosed garden of the Easter suite, with the king on a stone bench against the wall and Rowan asleep in his lap. Branwen had told her there would be pain. Branwen had been partly wrong. There was the bind breaking, and the bind had been wound into her at 13, and rewound at 17, and it had 7 years of habit in it, and a habit 7 years old does not let go of a body without taking something of the body with it. The first thing was the heat. It started in her chest, low and slow, the way a hearth starts under a damp log. It walked outward in waves to her shoulders and down her arms. Her hands began to tremble. She set her feet flat on the grass. She breathed the way Branwen had told her to breathe. The heat reached her wrists and stopped there and pulsed. The second thing was the cold. Under the heat, beneath the heat, behind it, the cold that had been her bind for 7 years began to thaw at the edges. It was not a thaw she had asked for. It was a thaw that hurt the way an arm hurts when the blood comes back into it after a long sleep. Needles, 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 all at once, all over, in a body she had been told for 7 years was not entirely hers. She made one small sound. She bit it off. The king did not move from the bench. He had been told not to. She had told him not to. She had told him, an hour earlier, that if he came toward her in the middle of it, her body might read the proximity wrong, and the wolf might come out faster than was safe. He had set his jaw. He had said one word. He had sat down on the bench. He was sitting there now, with Rowan asleep on his lap, and the boy's small hand wound into the fabric of his shirt, and his grey eyes were fixed on her, and his hand was on Rowan's back, and he was not moving. The third thing was the silver. It came up through her skin the way dye comes up through water. It started under the mark at her shoulder, and it spread down her arm, and up her neck, and across her collarbone, and down her sternum, and where it spread her skin did not change colour, but her skin began to mean something else than it had meant a minute before. The hair on her forearms stood up. The hair on her arms began to lengthen. The fingernails began to thicken. The body that had been bound for 7 years began to remember what it was supposed to be doing, and the remembering came in pieces, the way an old song comes back in pieces, the first phrase, then the chorus, then the bridge, then the long, slow last line that you had forgotten you knew. She went down on her knees. She did not fall. She lowered. The grass under her hands was cool. Her hands were no longer entirely hands. The 4 fingers and the thumb were still there, but the shape of the bones underneath was changing, and the changing did not hurt the way she had braced for. It felt instead like a door opening in a wall she had been leaning against for a very long time, without knowing she was leaning. She breathed out. She breathed out. She breathed out. She let it happen. The wolf that stepped out of the woman where the woman had been was tall at the shoulder and pale and quiet. She was the colour of a winter morning. Her eyes were silver. Her muzzle was long, and her ears were upright, and her tail moved once, slowly, then was still. She stood in the garden in wolf shape, and the air around her smelled different to her than it had smelled to the woman she'd been a minute before, and she could hear, for the first time in 7 years, the sound of her own heartbeat as a thing inside a chest that knew it was a wolf's. She looked at the king. The king did not stand. He did not move. He set Rowan very carefully against the bench. He went down to one knee on the grass. He said, "You are what you were promised to be." She closed the distance between them. She put her forehead against his shoulder. She felt his hand come up and settle on the back of her neck, and he held her there for a long time. And the wolf in her chest, the wolf she had not known she had, let out one low, long note that was not a howl, but was the sound of 7 years of bind letting go all at once. She heard a step at the garden gate. The wolf in her heard it before the woman in her would have. She lifted her head off the king's shoulder. She turned. The gate was closed. A figure was on the other side of the gate. A figure was very still on the other side of the gate. The king did not move. The king had heard nothing. The king had not yet relearned the trick of hearing through stone the way a wolf hears through stone. She had relearned it in the last 40 seconds. She crossed the grass in 3 bounds. She hit the gate with her shoulder. The wood split. The figure on the other side dropped the small crossbow he was holding and tried to run, and her teeth closed on the back of his coat, and she pulled him down, and she did not bite. She did not bite. The wolf in her chest wanted to bite. The woman in her chest, who was in the wolf in her chest, did not let the wolf bite. She pinned him. She held him. The king reached the gate behind her in 3 long strides. He looked at the man on the ground. The man was 20. The man was the second cousin of Lord Phelan. The man had been sent by the South Tower with a small bow and a small purpose, and the small purpose was on the ground beside his hand. A crossbow bolt with a black tip, the kind of tip that meant the South Tower was still working, the kind of tip that had been meant for Rowan through the garden gate from the alley. The king said, "Lira." She did not let the man go. "Lira." She did not let the man go. "Lira. He is alive. He will answer questions. Let him go." She let him go. The king's guard came over the wall. The guard took the man. The king did not look at the man. The king looked at her. He took off his coat and he put it around her shoulders, the way one puts a coat around a friend in winter, and the silver-furred wolf under the coat shrank slowly and quietly back into the woman she had been, with the silver still in the eyes and the coat hanging too long. She said, "Rowan." The king said, "On the bench, asleep. I will carry him." He carried him. They went inside. When she shifted back, the silver did not leave her eyes. It rimmed the pupils. The brown of her had gone to pewter under the silver. She would never paint paste on her own face the way she had painted it on her son's. She did not want to. She put on the robe Branwen handed her. She kissed Rowan's forehead where he slept. He stirred and did not wake. She looked at the king. She said, "One day." He said, "One day." The high hall was full again on the 12th day. The Alpha King had called a full court. The 7 Beta House heads were present. The remaining council elders were present. The Southern Pack envoys were present. The generals were present, 3 of them, the 3 who had been at the Harvest Moon Ball 4 years ago, and they had been ordered to be present by their king, and they had come, and they had not been told why. Viola was present. She was in chains. Her hair was down. 200 wolves filled the hall, the same 200 who had stood in the same hall 12 days ago, the same chandelier crystals ticking against each other in the same air, the same chairs at the high table, the same screens behind which the same kitchen corridor opened, the same flagstone where a wooden horse had fallen and been picked up and given back. Lira walked in. She walked in alone, because she had told the king she would walk in alone, and the king had said yes. She wore a dress of pewter-grey silk that Branwen had made for her in 2 days. Her hair was loose, her eyes were silver-rimmed. Rowan walked behind her, and his eyes had not been painted that morning, and they were the colour of a star. The hall did the thing it had done 12 days ago. 200 wolves stopped breathing on the same beat. She walked to the centre of the floor. She did not look at the high table. She did not look at Viola. She looked at the council clerk at the side table who was holding a writ in his hand. She said, "Read it." The clerk looked at the king. The king nodded once. The clerk read, "By the seal and signature of Luna Viola of Silvermoon, prepared this 5th day of the moon, a writ declaring the boy Rowan, of unknown parentage, to be of impure blood and ineligible for the protections of the 7 Beta houses, and consigning him to the rites of purification at the high moon of this month." The hall murmured. The hall understood. The murmur sharpened into a kind of held silence. The rites of purification meant one thing to a wolf pack. Every wolf in the hall knew it. Viola lifted her head. "Sire," she said. Her voice was small but steady. She had decided what her final move would be. She had had 4 days in a tower to decide it. "Sire, I withdraw the writ. I withdraw it before it is enacted. I withdraw it and I throw myself on the mercy of this court, and I beg." "You do not withdraw," said the king. His voice was quiet. "You wrote it," he said. "You sealed it. You delivered it to the council clerk 3 nights ago. The fact that you wrote it is the fact this court will judge you on. You may sit." She did not sit. The guards sat her. Lira lifted her voice. "My lords of the council," she said, "my lord generals of the Northern Crown, my lords of the 7 beta houses, this is what is true. 4 years ago, at the Harvest Moon Ball, Luna Viola of Silvermoon, with my consent withheld and unknown to me, arranged that I should be drugged and brought to a meeting with a man I was told was a captain of the Northern Crown's guard. The man was the Alpha King of the Northern Crown, in disguise, drugged in the same draft. Neither of us remembers what passed. The intention of the meeting was to produce a child who would be presented later as leverage in a Southern Pack political bargain. The fact that the man was the king and not a captain was unknown to Luna Viola at the time. The fact that I was Selene-born was known to her. The fact that the child born of that night was the first child of both royal lines in 9 generations was, until 12 days ago, known to no one alive. She paused. "I do not ask this court for vengeance. I ask this court to receive the truth. The 3 generals who were present at the Harvest Moon will confirm what I have said. They have been bound by the king's hand and by Branwen of the Northern Crown's healers to speak the truth in this court today. General Ardith, General Cale, General Murren, speak." The 3 generals, older men in their 50s, in coats of the Northern Crown, stood, one at a time. Each said the same words. "It is true, as the Luna of the Silver Crown has spoken it." They sat back down. The hall did not breathe. Viola in her chains lowered her head. Lira turned to the high table. She said, "There is one more thing." She lifted her hand. The mark that had spread from her knuckle to her shoulder across the days of his proximity was a Selene crescent. It glowed faintly through the silk of her sleeve. She did not roll the sleeve back. She did not need to. She said, "I am Lira of the Selene line. I am the last of the first crown. I do not claim a throne. I claim a son. The son will live. The anchor will hold. Branwen of the Northern Crown will confirm." Branwen, standing by the high table, said, "I confirm." Lira turned. She held out her hand to Rowan. Rowan, who had been standing behind her with the wooden horse held against his chest, came forward. His silver eyes were bright. He took her hand. Branwen brought the small silver bowl that had been prepared. Lira knelt. She drew her thumb across her own palm with a small ceremonial knife. A drop of blood fell into the bowl. The king at the high table came down off the dais without ceremony. He went to one knee on the flagstone beside her. He drew his own palm. A second drop fell. The bowl glowed. Rowan dipped one small finger into the silver light and put his small finger to his forehead the way Branwen had told him to. The light closed over him. 200 wolves felt it. The ones at the back of the hall felt it last. It was the long, low note of the great bell again, the one that had rung in the chest of the king 12 days ago, but ringing now in the chest of every wolf in the hall, and the air went warm, and the chandelier crystals stopped ticking, and Rowan's small body steadied the way a small flame steadies when the wind drops. He looked up at his mother. He said, "It does not hurt any more." She held him. She held him for a long time. When she let go, she stood. She turned to the high table. She turned to the council. She turned finally to Viola. She said, "I will not ask for your death." Viola lifted her head. Lira said, "You took my mother's place at my father's table. You took my name. You took my wolf. You took my son's name. You tried to take my son's life. None of that is forgiven. None of that will ever be forgiven. But I have a son who will grow up in a kingdom, and the kingdom my son grows up in will not be a kingdom where his mother answered cruelty with cruelty. You will be stripped. You will be unbound. You will be exiled to the cold north of the Iron Pass, where you will live in a healer's hut, where you will be denied bond to a wolf for the remainder of your life, and where you will be denied the use of the healer's craft by which you have done your harm. You will live. You will live a long time. You will think about it." Viola did not answer. She closed her eyes. The guards led her out. The hall stood, the Beta House heads stood, the generals stood. The Alpha King of the Northern Crown had been on one knee on the flagstone since he had drawn his own palm for the anchor, and he did not stand now. He looked up at her instead, and he said, in the small, steady voice he had used in council rooms for 20 years, the voice he had not used to ask a single soul for anything since he was 19 years old. "Will you stand at my side?" She did not answer at first. The hall waited. 200 wolves and 7 Beta House heads and 3 generals of the Northern Crown waited, and the king on one knee on the flagstone in front of her waited, and Lyra, who had stood in this hall 12 days ago in a kerchief and an apron with herb paste on her thumb, took her time about it. "Yes," she said at last, "I will stand at your side." He bent his head a little. He was about to speak the second sentence Branwen had told him he must speak in this hall. She raised her hand. Not high. Enough. "I will stand at your side," she said. "I will not stand at your side as Luna of the Northern Crown today. I have been Mira of the Kitchen for 3 years, and I have been Lyra of Silvermoon for less than a fortnight, and I have been a thing whose true name a healer told me an hour after that. I do not yet know which of those women I will be at the end of a year. Ask me at the end of a year. I will give you my answer then." He did not move. The hall did not move. She lowered her hand. She said, more quietly, "I am not refusing you. I am asking you to wait. The boy can be anchored without a Luna. The bond between us can be a bond without a crown. Crowns can come after. I have spent the years of my life being given titles I did not ask for, and I would like the next title I take to be one I have asked for. That is all." He closed his eyes for the length of a breath. When he opened them, the yellow ring around the pupil was still there. She had thought, the first time she had seen it on the first day, that it was the wolf reading her. She knew now it had been the man. "A year," he said. "A year. I will wait the year. Thank you." He did not stand. He looked up at her from the flagstone and he said, "Forgive me for not having looked for you." She did not say yes. She found that the word would not come. The word had been sitting in her chest for 12 days, waiting to be useful, and now that the moment for it had come, the word was the wrong word, and she stood there in front of 200 wolves with a forgiveness she had not earned, and a forgiveness she was not yet ready to give, and she had to decide what to say in the half-breath she had left to decide it. "You did not know to look," she said. "I do not need to forgive a thing you were not given the chance to do. The night that was taken from us both. There is no debt for that night between us. There is, between us, the years after, and the years after are work, and the work we will do together. That is what I have to give you. That is what I am giving you. It is not the answer you asked for. It is the answer I have." He bowed his head. He stayed on one knee. She crossed the small distance between them, and she put her hand on the back of his neck, the way she had put her hand on the back of her son's neck 12 days earlier, in this same hall, and she bent her forehead to his, and the 200 wolves of Silvermoon and the 7 Beta House heads, and the 3 generals of the Northern Crown, saw the king of the Northern Crown remain on one knee, while the woman who would not be his Luna for a year held him there, and the hall did not move, and the hall did not need to. She did not raise her voice, and the king did not rise. On the 9th night, between the day of the cousin and the day of the shift, Garrick found his king in the dark of the corridor outside the east suite. There was no lamp lit. The door of the suite was closed. 2 of the king's guards stood at the door at parade rest, with their eyes politely fixed on the opposite wall. Having been trained, over 30 years of standing outside doors the king happened to be on the wrong side of, in the precise art of not seeing. The king was leaning his shoulder against the wall. His coat was unbuttoned at the collar. His head was tipped back. His eyes were closed. He was holding, in his right hand, a small wooden horse with a chipped ear. He was not asleep. He was breathing in the deep, slow way of a man waiting out a thing inside his chest that did not yet have a name for itself. Garrick did not approach. He stood in the angle of the corridor for some time. When at last the king opened his eyes and lowered his head, and saw him there, the steward inclined his head the way he had inclined it for 30 years. "Sire?" "How long, Garrick?" "Half an hour, sire." "He left it on the garden bench." "Yes, sire." "He left it on the garden bench because he was tired." "Yes, sire." The king turned the small wooden horse over once in his hand. He did not look at it. He looked past it. After a while he tucked it inside his coat, against his ribs, where Garrick understood it would remain for the rest of the night. "Tell me," the king said, after another long pause, "have I been a kind man?" Garrick considered the question for the length of 2 breaths. He had served 3 kings. He had outlived 2 of them. He had been asked a great many things across the 30 years of his stewardship, and he had answered each of them the way a steward answered, which was to say, with the truth shaped into the kind of sentence a king could carry. "You have been a just one, sire." The king almost smiled. "That is not the same thing." "No, sire, it is not." "Will I be a kind one, in time?" "You have, sire, the materials." The king nodded once. He pushed himself off the wall. He passed Garrick without ceremony, the wooden horse still under his coat, and Garrick stood in the dark of the corridor a while longer, with the 2 guards at the door and the silence of the east suite behind him, and then he went and put himself to bed. She went to the south tower on the 10th day. She did not tell anyone she was going. The guards at the tower door knew her face, and they knew their orders, and they let her up the stair without comment, because Branwen had said the bind would unwind better in motion than in stillness, and Lira had been in motion for 2 days, and one of the places motion had been taking her, although she had not let herself name it, was a small room at the top of a narrow stair where her stepmother had been held since the council vote. The room had 1 window. The window faced the kitchen garden. There was a bed and a basin and a chair. There was no fire. Viola was sitting on the chair. She had not turned when Lira came up. Lira closed the door. She did not sit down. After a long moment, Viola said, without turning, "You should not be here. I know. You will not get from me what you came for." "I did not come for anything in particular." Viola turned. In the grey light of the small window, her face was the face Lira had grown up with, but the practised sweetness had been off it for 6 days, and what was underneath the sweetness was a woman older than Lira had ever seen her be. She had not put up her hair. Her hands were bare. The blood-red gown had been replaced with the grey wool of the confinement, and the grey wool did not flatter her, and she did not seem to care that it did not flatter her, and that more than anything else was the new thing. She said, "She used to braid her hair the way you braid yours." Lira did not answer. "Your mother?" "My sister. She used to braid it tight along the side when she was thinking. She would braid it without knowing she was braiding it. I would slap her hand sometimes to make her stop, because the braid pulled the hair from her temple, and she would say, 'Vi, you are too sharp.' And I would say, 'Then stop pulling at your own head.' And she would laugh, and she would braid it again the next afternoon while she was reading. She did that until the day she died. I have not seen anyone braid their hair the way she braided hers until I saw you do it in the kitchen in the 2nd year you were back, and I went to my room for an hour, and I did not come down for supper." Lyra's chest did the thing it had done in the council room 6 days earlier. She did not let it show. She said, "Did you love her?" Viola did not answer at first. After a while she said, "Yes." "Did you arrange her death?" "No." "Did you watch her die without calling for a healer?" "Yes." Lira nodded once. She said, "Did my father know what you were?" Viola looked away from her. She looked at the small square of the window where the kitchen garden was. Her hands tightened on the arms of the chair. "He knew enough to be unhappy," she said. "He did not let himself know more than that. He had loved your mother, and he had spent the love of his life on her, and what was left over was not the kind of love that asks hard questions. He kept the lamp turned low. He held my hand on his deathbed, and he said he was sorry, and what he was sorry for was that he had not turned the lamp up. He had not turned it up about me. He had not turned it up about the fever cup either, because he was the one who carried you to my chamber the night the fever broke, and he did not ask what was in the cup, because the not asking had become a habit with him by then. He had been a good man. A good man is not the same thing as a man who looks." She turned back. "You should go," she said. Lira nodded. She turned to the door. She stopped with her hand on the latch. She said, without turning. "I would have spared you the worst part of what you did if you had told me she loved me." She left the room. She closed the door. She walked down the narrow stair with one hand on the wall, and her wolf in her chest beating like a thing that had wanted to be let out and had been held back by a hand on its collar. And she did not weep, because the weeping had been the first night, and the weeping had been the infirmary night, and the body had only so much weeping in it per week. 3 months later, the kitchen of the Northern Crown smelled of bread. Esme had recovered. She walked with a cane now, and she would walk with a cane for the rest of her life. But she had taken the appointment of mistress of the king's pantry without quarrel, and she ran the kitchen the way she had run the kitchen at Silvermoon, which was to say, she ran it correctly, and she asked no questions, and she noticed everything. Branwen visited every other week from the healer's hall. The 7 beta houses of Silvermoon had been reorganized into 6, the smallest having been dissolved on the conviction of Lord Phelan. The Selene Line registry had been reopened by royal decree. The Beta Line healer's compound that had been used to bind Lyra's wolf was outlawed by the same decree, which Lira had drafted herself in her own hand, with a quill and a pot of black ink at the long council table of the Northern Crown. The decree was short. It said one thing: no wolf shall be bound by the hand of another, neither by draft nor by document, for the convenience of any house or any throne. It would be read aloud in every pack of the kingdom on the first day of every moon for as long as the kingdom stood. Rowan was 4. His eyes were silver. He did not wear paste. He had not worn paste in 3 months. He climbed the king's shoulders in the kitchen on the morning of his 4th name day, and the king, who had not climbed anything in his life with a child on his shoulders before, walked very carefully under door frames. Esme watched from the counter and pretended not to. Lira was at the long table writing a letter. Her wolf rested at her feet. The wolf had a name now. The wolf was Vera. Vera slept the long, quiet sleep of an animal that had been awake too long, and was finally allowed to rest. And Lyra's hand moved across the parchment, and the morning light came in through the high east window, and her chest, which had cracked open in a council room 12 weeks ago, did not hurt any more. The letter was to Esme's sister. It was an invitation. Rowan, from the king's shoulders, said, "Bread." Lira looked up. The king said, "2 honeys." "2 honeys," said Rowan. "2 honeys," said the king. He set Rowan on the counter. Esme cut bread. Esme passed bread. The king buttered the bread the way he had learned to butter bread, which was poorly, and Rowan corrected him by guiding his hand, which was the way the king had decided he wished to be corrected, going forward by his son. Rowan took a bite. He chewed. He looked at the king with his silver eyes and the wooden horse still under one arm, 3 months older and a little more dented, and he said, "You smell like me." The king's mouth moved. The muscle that controlled smiling had gotten more practice in 3 months than it had had in 4 years. He said, "Yes, I do." Lira put down her quill. She placed her free hand on her stomach. It was very early. Branwen had confirmed it the week before. There was a second child. There would be twins, Branwen had said, which was the way of doubled royal blood, and Lira had laughed for the first time in many years at the news, and the king had not laughed, but he had closed his eyes for a long moment and then opened them, and then taken her hand and held it for a long quiet hour with his thumb moving across her knuckle, the way it had moved across her knuckle on the first day, and she had let it. They had said a king without a wolf was no king at all. She had heard it for 4 years in markets and prayer houses and council chambers, and on the morning the bread came out of the oven and the boy ate it with 2 honeys on his father's lap. She thought of the saying again, and she thought of how it had been a saying about an absence pretending to be a saying about a man. The wolf had not been cursed. The wolf had been waiting, the way her own wolf had been waiting, the way her son had been waiting, the way she herself had been waiting in a kitchen for 3 years, with herb paste on her thumb without yet knowing what for. The kingdom had been wrong only about waiting. The kingdom had thought waiting was an absence. Waiting was a room with the door closed, and the people inside it warm. In the kitchen of the Northern Crown, on a bright morning in late spring, a small boy with silver eyes ate bread with 2 honeys on his father's lap, and his mother wrote a letter, and her wolf slept at her feet, and the chest that had cracked open in a council room in another pack on another day did the small final thing it had been waiting to do. It closed, not the way a wound closes, the way a door closes when the people you love are all inside. Thank you for staying with her. Thank you for staying with him. Thank you for staying for the morning the bread came out of the oven and the boy ate it with 2 honeys, and the king did not stop smiling, even a little, even just at the corner of his mouth, even just where the muscle had remembered. The happiness was real. The happiness was scarred. The scar was where the door had been. It was enough. It was finally enough.